Magdalene's Blog 57. As we entered, sunlight was streaming through the furthest open-shuttered windows to where the master's chair was, with tiny dust particles glinting in the rays. On the stone floor, there were many rugs and cushions, where people obviously would sit and listen to the master speak. Down the side of that half of the room, close to the inner wall, was a long bench, and behind this a gap wide enough for people to walk down to a door. Next to Yeshua's chair by the far wall, there was a small table and a short bench, with a wide rack full of scrolls mounted on the wall behind. There were 3 doors into the long room. One at the furthest end, near to the chair, led back into the house, obviously for access to and fro, for the master and others too. Another, down this end, was where we had come in, from the anteroom and the kitchen beyond. Then there was the main double door towards the street, which was where most people would enter and leave by. In this half of the room, there were chairs and several couches, mostly by the central arches where sickly people could easily be placed. We went over, still with our drinks, to 4 chairs that were by the window, set around a small table. My heart gratefully sensed the purposeful peace that the room inspired, even though the wings of darkness still flapped menacingly around my mind. Mary asked me how long it was since I'd been in Galilee, and so I started to tell her my story. Her face stayed serenely beautiful, though there were clear concerns being etched there as well. Her attentive nods pulled me to say more than otherwise I might have. First, it was remarkably easy for me to talk, although I could still hear the spirit mutterings. But as my story came closer to the point of seeing the Magus Simon, things got harder and harder. It was as if my tongue was being tied in knots, and the volume of the noise inside my head grew impossible to ignore. As their clamour to shut me up became more and more intense, Mary put a hand on mine and turned her questions instead upon Rachel. Rachel had heard much of what had happened to me from Johannes, and was able to fill many of the gaps I had left, but the struggle still raged on within me. At the point where I thought control was being ripped from my will, a sudden light shone brightly, just for a brief moment, forcing close the opening breach. In the respite this gave, I looked down the long room to see the Master Yeshua had entered in and was walking up to where we sat. An endless moment, yet he moved in certainty, bringing that presence of serenity to come to me in that desert vision. He was smiling as though this was a reunion of old friends, rather than an urgent rescue of the demon-crazed woman that I was. I turned towards him, leaving my chair to kneel upon the floor as he approached. The spirits had again stirred a frenzied buzzing, and somehow I managed to ignore them. He wore the softest of robes that I felt along my outstretched arms as he placed his hands at my elbows to lift me up. His hair brushed against mine, and as I rose he breathed into my ear, spoke the word in holy breath. There was a sound that came with the breath that was like 1,000 million tiny stars tinkling together. This noise was more encompassing than the buzzing, rolling it up like a mighty rushing wind might gather leaves, growing till nothing else was there, and then receding out and out and out into the furthest recesses of my inner world. Little rippling waves going on to the end, then stillness. I stood there amazed and transfixed. There were no more spirits in my mind. I knew for sure. Gone, and I was free. It was impossible to take this in at first. Instead, I collapsed gently to the floor at the feet of the one who had rescued me. There I felt entirely happy and at peace. Yeshua was talking to Rachel about where she had come from, and whether she wished to stay. She briefly said she was from Tyre, and had brought me there because she'd heard of his abilities. She said as well that she very much wanted to stay and learn from him anything he might wish to teach her. I had somehow managed to get up from the ground, and Yeshua turned to me again. Mary Magdalene, he said, and those two words were like a welcome and acceptance. It is done. You are free. Do you wish to learn the way to the peace eternal within as well? I do, I said, with everything I am. The answer came easily. There was no question. Well, first I would like you to go and make your peace with your mother. She must need to see you very much. Then, when you are completely ready, come back here again and find me. Being given a task to do was like another release, a purpose to fulfill, and a promised return. I bowed my head in assent and said I would. Rachel cleared her throat and asked whether she could take me to my mother and then come back as well. Yeshua beamed a smile that meant more than words. Then thank you, he said, and please do come back as soon as you're able. Somewhere in the house, a gong had sounded, and the master took us both by an arm and moved towards the anteroom door. You must come and eat with us. Mother, is there room for two more with you ladies? Of course, she answered like a gentle wind to his strong son. Plenty of room, and plenty to eat too. And then I would like to show you both our garden as well. Once all the men have finished their repast out there. They laughed together, as at some untold joke, and we went through to taste our first meal in his house. Food had never tasted so good before.